First of all, thank you all for coming very much here to Ward 3, which is my, of course, home ward for a long time. But first I wanted to introduce you to some of the public officials and city people who are here. Of course, Trish Klee is our Ward 3 member of the Board of Aldermen. Thank you. Carrie Spear is state rep from Ward 3. Derek Tebow is Ward 8 Alderman. Rick Dowd is Ward 2. I saw, where's Sherry? Sherry is a Ward 3 rep. Steve Lyons is on the ZBA, chair of the ZBA.
No, not chair anymore.
Not chair anymore. He retired from that. Paul Patty, Carl Seidel are on the Rail Commission, which is going to be meeting again soon. Carl just reminded me. So what we normally do is I just talk about a few things that are going on, and then we just take your questions and comments on anything that you would like to talk about. We've only got about 1 hour. We try to finish so that you'll come back next time. And secondly, we have a meeting down at City Hall after this, so we need to leave, an hour or a little bit more. Pardon?
Speak up for us old people.
So, the city is doing well, very well, in my opinion. We have received some very significant recognitions recently, and you've probably read about this, but we were recognized as being the second safest city in the United States.
No kidding.
Now, this is due, of course, to very good work by our police department, our fire department. It's my priority to even improve and get even safer, but beyond the good work that they're doing, and we are giving them all kinds of support and to make their jobs easier. Beyond that, we were highly scored on the city's response to the COVID epidemic, the response by public health. We have a very law-abiding population, a very low of 182 cities, the second lowest rate of personal assaults out of 182 cities. So that is something we want to build on. We were recognized as being the 4th best run city in the United States, and this is mostly a measure of the efficiency and effectiveness of the city, comparing the cost of services and comparing them with the quality of services. We want to build on that as well. We're doing a lot of things to save money. We reformed the city health care plan in recent years, which is saving $3.9 million a year. Now the costs have gone up, but not as quickly. There was a year or two of almost flat costs. We're buying electricity as a result of what we call a smart energy policy at a much lower rate than the Eversource price. We have many of our accounts we're buying at 5.9 cents a kilowatt. That will last for a couple more years. And we want to continue to save money and do whatever we can to try to keep expenses down. But we are facing inflation and other pressures on the city finances that, of course, affect us. Some of the other things that are coming, I don't know if you've heard about community power. So this is a way to save money for residents of Nashua on electric bills. The legislature, several years back, authorized community power, which enables communities or a community or a group of communities to get together and purchase electricity for Eversource customers. And to do this in combination with other communities if that's the arrangement. So we are in a group of 17 cities and towns, including some other cities, Dover, Lebanon, towns, Hanover, Exeter, 17 in total. And we've gotten together and have, pursuant to the state statute, we're about to launch community power. We have hired a firm that does electricity purchasing across the country for other community power organizations. And we have engaged a company called Calpine for kind of the banking operation. And it is possible that we will go out into the market to bid for power within a few days. And if that does happen, this would kick in come sometime in April. Now, the reason that power can be purchased more cheaply than Eversource is the purchases will take place off schedule. In other words, they buy power every 6 months right now, and we would be buying power not on their schedule. If we can go out into the market soon, we will definitely save off their rate. And if anyone is worried about, leaving Eversource, you can always opt out. You will have the opportunity anytime you want to go back to Eversource or come back into community power, however you want to do it. Before this starts, you will get a mailing in the mail which explains everything, all of the options, how the whole thing works. And then if you have questions, there'll be places you can contact to get any questions answered. Now, yes, go ahead, please, ma'am.
Well, if you'd rather I wait.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I think this is a good time.
My power bill, my Eversource bill has doubled
Yes,
in the last 6 months. Doubled.
yes.
47 to 9 to over $100, maybe $101. So how will this be reflected in this new line?
So when you look at your bill, there are a number of charges. And one is the cost of electricity, which is near the top, and and with the rates they have now, which are around 20.6 cents a kilowatt hour, that's the majority of your bill. So Eversource will continue to be paid for the other charges. They will be paid for distribution and the use of their lines and all that kind of thing, and you will receive a bill from Eversource. Now, Eversource itself does not produce power. It buys power to bring into Nashua. And so if we are successful in reducing the cost per kilowatt hour, you would see that charge that now is at 20.6 cents, it would come down and would help to reduce your bill.
Are we talking 1/3, reduce it by 1/3?
Well, we don't know yet because we haven't gone into the market. Probably not 1/3, but some degree of savings. And the plan, and again, this is 17 communities. The plan is to build a reserve so that if the day ever comes when for a short period of time community power cost is above Eversource, the reserve could be used to subsidize the bill for a temporary period of time and keep it below the Eversource rate. So you will see a savings, but I doubt it'll be 1/3. But again, we have to see what happens when they go into the market. Now, I wanted to mention, I think some people maybe are concerned about something that Trish has been working very hard on, which is the fact that the tunnel the underpass that goes into Thoreau's Landing has been deteriorating and collapsing. This is a railroad asset, and it is their responsibility to maintain and fix this thing. Trish has contacted a lot of people, but among them the congressional delegation, and is arranging a meeting with CSX. CSX is the new owner of the track. They bought it from Pan Am 6 months ago.
Yeah, they've been working on it for 2 years, but I think they inked it about 6 months ago.
So we are hopeful and optimistic that we can persuade them to make the necessary repairs. But is there anything else that you think is?
Well, part of the sit-down conversation, they're going to
Wait for the mic, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. Part of the sit-down and the conversation that we're going to have, hopefully will include NHDHOT, city people, and residents, especially from Thoreau's Landing. I talked to them also about the tracks not being straight, the potential for them coming and blocking Main Street as they did once before, as well as that teeth-jarring bumps that you go over on Main Street, and how we want to pave the streets, and what are the stipulations they're going to put, and can they get in there before we do. So all those conversations need to be had, and they need to be had soon, especially with the Ohio thing happening. A lot of residents who live on that line are very panicked because it is freight that goes through, and I've gotten a lot of emails recently, so we're escalating it. Annie Custer, Jean Shaheen's office, and Senator Hassan's office as well, are all going to, as we put it, rattle their cage and create some meetings, so.
So coming in, Pan Am has been was the owner of the track for a long, long time, and they were always very unresponsive. CSX, in proposing this purchase, promised that they would be more responsive, and because they needed regulatory approval, so they, in order to convince people that the purchase would be a good idea, they promised that they would be more responsive to the concerns of Nashua and other places where the rail runs through. One thing we talked to them about was the crossing on Main Street. We need their cooperation in order to smooth that out. But here's another issue, and hopefully they will follow through and be more responsive to our people's concerns. Yes.
I live near that line, and I'm telling you, they're running a lot more trains recently. A lot more.
And where do you, what,
I live
freight,
on
they must be
Atherton
freight,
Avenue.
right?
Luckily, I live on the, oh, I have a pretty loud voice. But, so, yeah, I live on the opposite side of the track, so, but I can hear I can hear the train pretty, and I've lived here 30 years, and I can tell that those trains are running very much more frequently than they used to run.
Just to let you know how bad Pan Am has been, last year around this time, 3 weekends in a row, Thurles Landing had to put up with 72 hours of those trains idling with diesel fuel going in through them, and all we got from Pan Am was, it's cold, we can't move down the tracks, this is the only safe place to park it. And those people suffered, and so that's another thing I said, will not happen, it's not acceptable anymore, so.
Yes.
A question, and I also live on Atherton, and we walk those tracks, and the ties are rotten, and the spikes are missing, and that's how they derail. The rails go apart, and the train goes down. Do we know if any of those tanker cars, which we see, those black things, are any of those carrying dangerous, toxic, or flammable materials?
I don't think we know what is in the cars. I mean, maybe we should make an effort to find out. I mean, there used to be, when Grace was open, Grace Chemical in the South End, there was really significant chemicals going in there. Hydrogen cyanide was going in there, and they were making shampoo or something. It was
Cyanide.
hydrogen cyanide, yes.
No wonder my hair.
And there was, at one point, there was a small leak. An area was evacuated. The gas blew across the river, but there was an evacuation. So your point being, given what we've seen, we should try to find out what's passing through, which is a very good suggestion, so thank you. And Megan is writing that down, or remembering it, and we will see what we can do there. Maybe we can take that up in the meeting. Yes, sir.
So, and thank you for coming, Mayor. So knowing would be great, but let's say we find out they're carrying hydrogen cyanide, they're carrying plutonium. Is there anything we can do about it? Can we say, no, you can't carry that stuff through our city? There are people living here.
Unfortunately, certainly the city can't, and really the state can't either. I mean, this is, the railroads have, are federally regulated. I mean, we ran into this with the hydrogen cyanide. So the most upsetting thing then was that they would park the chemical cars at kind of all those tracks near, there's a whole series of tracks near the crossing at East Hollis Street, and they would leave the cars there over the weekend. And people were concerned that, well, this dangerous stuff is just sitting there for days. I mean, someone could go there and vandalize it or, something else. And, they would listen to some degree and sometimes move them, but we had no authority to force them to do anything. But with the congressional delegation involved, maybe we can, at least find out, and then maybe we don't see those type of chemicals coming through. We can try to figure out what to do if we can determine what it is that's coming through the city.
I just sent an email, so.
Back in the hydrogen cyanide days, I mean, there were a group of activists that were, talking about this and about Grace in general, and I think, had an effect, but not control. I think we improved the situation, but certainly didn't eliminate it until the plant closed. Yes, Carrie.
It's time to ask questions.
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you.
Mike.
As you know, this past week, we had a rough time, Nashua had a rough time in the State House. The state was going to mandate a bill that would have allowed anyone to tear down their house and put up 4 townhouses, anywhere, in any neighborhood, at any time, without warning, just do it. No zoning, no nothing. And thanks to Trish warning me in time and talking to the mayor, we were able to put up a fight, and we stopped it. But they're coming back. I've seen news articles, I've seen Twitter reports, they're coming back. And what was disappointing to me more than anything is we had very few advocates for cities at the State House. I think that if we want to preserve Nashua with the way that it is, the wonderful community that it is, we need to work together to try and stop some of this, because it's coming back, and they vowed to, and as a matter of fact, there's another committee working on it. And so I would like as many people as possible to sign up with me to at least get the information so that you can email these guys up at the State House and tell them to stop doing this stuff that our town really can't afford to be torn apart the way they want to do it. And in talking to the people who supported the bill, it was very disheartening. They wanted to confine the problem, or what their perceived solution was, to Manchester, Nashua, some parts of Dover, some parts of Keene, some parts of Merrimack. And these are towns that have sewers. Now, Manchester and Nashua have the oldest sewers in the state. They were set up in 1932. That's when they began construction. Floods ruined them in 1936. They rebuilt. Our sewers, there's sections of our sewers that are so old, they're literally, they're porous and they need relining. So there's all kinds of issues. If you go right on the sewer website, you'll find out all about that stuff. We can't just take, without any kind of planning, a willy-nilly effort by anyone to just start overloading these systems before we have a chance to plan. And the other thing that I notice is they don't think Nashua and Manchester or anybody's doing anything. They don't think we're building anything. They think we're not building any housing. I put out newspaper articles as best I could that people should know that we have almost 1,500 apartments and units coming online, and more is planned and all kinds of planning, and no one knows this up there. They think we're doing nothing. So I would like people to kind of at least give me your emails or whatever so I can bring this news up to the state so they can stop doing this to us. And on that note, I'll leave you. Help me to help us.
So, anybody else have questions?
Just gonna make
Yes,
one
Carl.
comment. Are you aware of what was done a couple of years ago over in Rochester? Over in Rochester, where they rebuilt the rail all the way up to Ossining to handle heavier freight, and I was wondering if you've been talking with CX about, working with them on some of these things now.
Well, of course, it would be great if the tracks were improved, and were the passenger rail project to go forward, that would result in major improvements to the track from Lowell up to Manchester, which would aid freight as well. So I think we're keeping our fingers crossed regarding and working hard to try to make that project a reality in order to, and one benefit would be the improvement of the tracks. But while we're on the rail issue, the State DOT was in the middle of the final planning phase of the Capitol Corridor Rail project, and was, they say, about 70% through the work. And a couple of big things remaining. One was all of the coordination with the MBTA, who would be running the line, and probably reach tentative agreements with them, or at least a memorandum of understanding. And number two, to prepare an application to the federal government to receive capital funds to help pay for the project, as well as operating subsidies. Those things are not done. And then back in December, the Executive Council voted on a 3-2 vote to stop the work. And the way into it was that there had to be some kind of contract extension, and they voted against it, and it stopped the work. Now, the DOT, who would really like to finish the work, tells us that, they think the amount that is is required to finish it is in the range of $700,000 to $800,000. But they're working on it and will give us an answer. We have met with the City of Manchester, who's also very concerned and interested in this. We've talked with them about the possibility of jointly using ARPA, which is a form of federal aid that we receive, to pay to complete the work, even though really this should be a state responsibility, at least so that we have something to potentially pursue. If nothing is done right now and the Executive Council's action becomes the final answer, there would never be rail, never be passenger rail, because you cannot do it without federal support. There's no rail operation in the country, I don't think, that doesn't receive a federal subsidy. Paul and Carl are on, we have a local rail committee that kind of helps guide the city's efforts, and everyone should know about that. Yes, Sherry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, didn't a report just come out?
Wait for the mic, please.
Didn't a re, is this thing on?
Just for the video. It's for the camera.
Didn't a report just come out, and how does that fit into the report that's not quite complete, about it costing $787 million and $17 million annually? I mean, I didn't go into it, but I keep seeing that. Where did that report come from, and how does it fit in?
Well, that just came out last night. I don't know how so the union leader and probably others reported on that. So that is part of the work that was the part of the work that had been actually done. And so we really haven't had a chance to read it in detail. It's, quite extensive, but it came out around 5 o'clock yesterday, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I assume the figures that were quoted are correct, although, we know that the capital costs would be significant, but we can get federal, if we can ever get to the point of a federal application, we can get federal support, federal dollars to pay for much or most of the capital improvements. The operating amount that they cited, 17 million, it's my impression that it does not account, it is the total operating costs without the fare book, without the fares, the revenue from the fares, and from advertising and other sources of revenue. As we were meeting with the DOT, as this planning phase progressed, they were telling us that they were running several scenarios regarding ridership. One was very pessimistic, they sort of related to COVID, kind of a very pessimistic approach. Another was kind of a middle of the road, and one was a projection which suggested that COVID would not affect at all long-term ridership. My recollection is that under the second and third scenarios, they thought that the operation, there would be enough riders and the fares would be sufficient, that the operation would break even or even make a small amount of money. So DOT and the people working from the state were very optimistic about the prospects for this passenger rail if it could ever be established. But so what came out, and there was a Union Leader article which was kind of confusing because some people gained the impression from that, oh, well, everything's done. Well, yes, a certain amount of the work is done, and there it is, great, that's good. But there's no agreement with the MBTA and as to how this would work, how they would do it, and there is no application to the federal government, which is a huge job. So those things still need to be done and need to be paid for. Yes, yes.
Just a question. We're finishing up the Art Center, and it's going to open soon. We have some other big projects. We have some other big projects going on downtown. Is there any interest in the city, or are you pursuing any more possibilities of using New Market tax credits for those programs?
Possible. Now, no definite plan. So people understand the context. New Market Tax Credit is a program that allows a municipal project with you need a very complicated setup to do it, but allows a municipal project to receive tax credits from the IRS or the federal government, and then these tax credits get sold, and it brings cash to the project. So in the context of the Performing Arts Center, we got sufficient tax credits to bring in about $2.4 million of cash, is my recollection. Now, it is never a sure thing because the IRS has to allocate, federal government has to allocate the tax credits to a private bank. The private bank has to select your project to be one of the ones to which they want to allocate money. It's a competitive process. They want projects that are going to be successful. It becomes a kind of a tax disaster if the project can't last at least 7 years. So were we to undertake, there's certain things that might be eligible, but there's no decision that we're going to use tax credits towards this or that.
Thank you.
Yes.
In light of that question, could you tell us when this was first approved, there was going to be a private funds and at $4 million plus. We never heard where that money is and who's managing that money, and to support the operation of this center. It was also going to be $15 million, and I think the last I heard it was $25 million. Can you tell me how we managed to go from the 15 to 25? And do we have the $4 million, and where is that money?
So the original idea and the original proposal was to build a performing arts center on the second floor of the corner of Pearl and Main. And based upon that, the city put out requests for proposals from various architects. And a couple of things happened. Number one, and we also engaged a scheduling firm, Spectacle Management, to schedule, program the center. Spectacle's agreement was, look, we can operate this. We do not need any subsidy. We can operate this. We will run the whole thing. And so that seemed attractive because people were concerned that there would have to be an annual subsidy going to the center. But as we got into it, first there was local input from a woman who runs the National Community Music School. And she was the first one who said, look, you cannot have a performing arts center on the second floor because the performers, it's too much trouble. You've got to have something where the performers can get in and out. They're not going to be going up elevators or anything like that. Number two, as we talk with Spectacle and we're beginning to talk with the architects who, and each of whom had teams to design the center, it became apparent that the best place to be in terms of size was 750 seats, not the originally conceived 500. So the architectural firm that came in, one architectural firm, Icon, came in and said, look, here's what you should do. Build it on the first floor, 750 seats, and have a balcony. And that way, performers will want to come there. We had a committee of people, a lot of community members were kind of involved in selecting the architect. It was a competitive thing. Everybody was interviewed. And I think the vote was 9-1 to go with Icon, the firm that was eventually selected. So the decision was made, look, we should go from the original cost was not 15, I think it was 21 or something.
15 million.
It was 15 to go to 25, but that we would get at least $4 million of outside funds. Now, and so the project has gone forward. The city bonded for 21 million. All costs above that have been paid through either the tax credits or the raised money. The people who are raising the money, there's a committee led by Rich Lannon and Deb Novotny. And so we had $2.4 million of tax credits. There was an anonymous $1 million gift. The Bank of America gave $500,000. There have been, I think two anonymous. There have been two $250,000 gifts. One of them was anonymous. I'm not sure I forget if the other one was just anonymous or there's a name on that. We've had $100,000 gifts. So they've raised more than the $4 million, and they've paid for a few improvements over and above, I think, which was originally planned, and the Spectacle is programming the place, and it seems like they've got a lot of shows going already, and the place, it isn't even open yet. If you look, you see there's probably 15 shows scheduled already. So that's what happened.
It just seemed the whole proposal changed without really knowing what was going on. So in the future, I think it would be great, it's something that expensive for the town. I mean, we find this all over the place. I mean, federal government, local governments, we're spending money, and we're running out of money.
Well, the
And
plan,
the federal government doing it, but that's you, that's me, that's all of us here that are putting that money in for these projects.
all right, well, two things. First of all, I think some people were skeptical that this would work, and it's pretty clear it's going to work. It's going to bring tens of thousands of people downtown. So the Performing Arts Center had an economic development strategy behind it to build a healthier, stronger downtown economy. And the reason for that is that the downtown is basically generates more in taxes than it requires in services. There are very few school children. There's snow plowing, but there's no garbage collection. It's all commercial. So there's square mile or so that pays nearly $6 million in taxes, requiring very little in services. But in the downtown, if you look at history, you see that there has been a lack of private investment in the downtown area. We have seen, in terms of anything significant, all there has been, and these are very important and worthwhile projects, very helpful to the city, but we've seen mill conversions. Now, the mill conversions are great, but they're financially easier than ground-up construction because you get the benefit when you do a mill conversion of a 40%, I think the number is 40%, you get the benefit of a 40% historic tax credit, which comes back to the project and provides such a cash infusion that it makes a conversion a much easier thing to accomplish. When you build from the ground up, you don't get that tax credit. Now, the point here is to use public investment to attract private investment. Now, that has already happened. The School Street project, which is the first time apartments have been built from the ground up anywhere near that scale in more than 100 years, probably back to around 1900. And that involves $30 to $40 million of private investment. It will pay $400,000 in taxes approximately, maybe $350 to $400. The builder there from Florida says, I would not have come to Nashua without the Performing Arts Center. I mean, I really would never even have thought of it, and it gave me confidence to invest in downtown. We would see more investment like that if the market now is very strong, and there are some, I'm going to say, speculators who have gained control of other parcels that could be developed, and they are holding those parcels in the hopes of making very large profits, turning them over. There's one on Spruce Street, there's one on East Hollis, there's one on Elm, there's one on the Corvo-Routhier. So the annual cost of the debt service on the Performing Arts Center is $1 million a year. But if we get $400,000 of taxes, the net becomes $600. And, we have a $30 million budget. So most of the money, 77%, goes to pay for salaries and benefits. A very small portion, maybe 6% of the city budget or less, goes to all of the capital, all of the debt service, paying off interest and principal on everything, all the schools, the Performing Arts Center, all the other stuff comes to only 5 or 6% of the city budget. So sometimes people think, well, if you do a capital project, it's going to blow up the taxes. What causes taxes to go up are the operating expenses of the departments. And that tends to be wages and benefits. But it's important that we pay our employees fairly and for many reasons. But let me give you a couple of examples. Right now, the police department is down. It kind of varies from day to day, almost week to week, but 12, 14 officers, something like that. If they weren't the best paid, the best paid police department in New Hampshire, they'd be down a lot more than that because they're attracting police officers from other departments. It's a time when not a lot of people want to be cops, is the reality. Number two, the teachers. We have 900 or so teachers. Before the contract that was signed a year or so ago, about a year ago, teachers averaged $61,000 a year. Below the state average, 50th out of all the districts in New Hampshire. So there are 50 districts that are paying more. We signed a contract that increased wages about 4% for 4 years running. I supported that because we need quality teachers. We cannot, I believe, in Nashua on the Mass border, afford to be so low in terms of teachers' pay. Now, this will not correct completely the issue, but it was as much as it seemed we could afford. And our teachers have worked hard and been dedicated, and we need to pay them fairly and according to the market. And that is the kind of thing, but when you do that, it causes the taxes and the budget to go up. The budget for Nashua went up 4% last year, for the current year, meaning the one that was passed in June, went up 4%. In the context of inflation that was a lot higher, and various pressures that come from the state of New Hampshire to increase expenses. So that kind of gives you a picture of the financial issues that the city faces every year. And I don't know if some of the alders wish to add to that, or? Yes.
Yeah, so,
Sorry to go on so long, but, we got into the money, and that's kind of the
yeah,
deal.
so let's talk about the money for a moment.
Yes.
So you talked earlier about measures to reduce spending. You
Yes.
also talked about how the downtown is really the most profitable part of the city. And something that I'm just sort of wondering about is because I'm relatively new to New Hampshire, as I understand it, the only source of income that the city has is property tax. Is that correct?
It's basically true. Now, the downtown is a source of, profit for the city, but it's not the only one, and it's probably not the biggest one. I mean, we have the South End, the commercial district down there. Even though the mall, the biggest taxpayer, the assessments and the taxes are actually going down because of, the trends nationally and, with retail. And then there's Amherst Street, and there's Northeastern Boulevard. So, those are kind of taxed. But back to the second question about is it the only source of revenue? It's not the only source, but it is by far the largest one. So out of a $300 million budget, we collect property taxes of around $250 million. So only 20% comes from other sources.
Okay, so my question then is, could you talk more about sort of what are you thinking, or how does this concept that, okay, our main source of revenue is property tax, and the most profitable part of town is downtown.
That is one of the profitable.
Okay.
It is not the most,
Okay.
it is one of them.
But how do we can have more stuff if we have more money, right? We can pay our
Yes.
teachers more if we have more income.
Correct.
Right? We can have more parks, we can have more performing arts centers if we have more income. So how are we going to increase the income of the city? What's the long-term vision for that?
Well, I've been talking about it. We need to attract private investment because we don't tax business. If a business operates out of a closet and they make $10 billion, we don't get anything from that. That's good, maybe they employ a lot of people or whatever, but property taxes are only derived from the value of real estate. And so we need to see the city develop in a real estate context that helps to increase overall property values, but also makes sense for the city. We can't put anything. They want to build an asphalt plant to the east part in the downtown. Now that, in my opinion, it would be, yes, and that's a good word for it. And we'd get taxes from that, but that's not a positive. So we need to we need to attract investment. That's part of the strategy of the Performing Arts Center. If all the potential projects went ahead, we could probably I mean, we actually could get hundreds of millions invested in the downtown, I think. You know, a 300-unit project now is probably nearly $100 million. So that's the strategy. We've got, you know, some new companies coming in, but we have expensive housing, and we have expensive housing, and we have the complaint of businesses that they can't find employees. So, you know, those are both constraints. Now, Sherry, did you have a question? I promised her I'd call on her, but sorry.
No, I need your permission to talk about the county. Is that okay, or would you prefer not to? About 3 minutes.
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to dovetail on what Mayor Donches said about wages. If you go on, first of all, the county is having a terrible time getting employees. The nursing home has a census, we have 296 beds available, and I believe the census is around 232 because we can't find nurses to fulfill it, and what that means is the waiting list goes up, so that's just one of them. I was on the website just yesterday for the Department of Corrections. If you go on the website, you'll see what positions are available. They are hiring corrections officers at a starting pay of $18.19. $18.19. If you look at an apartment in Nashua that doesn't come with rats, it's about a one-bedroom is $1,800. If you take 30% of that, you need an income of $72,000, okay, to afford that apartment. If you divide that by the number of hours that you work, you need about $35 an hour to pay for that one-bedroom apartment. This is serious, and we, again, voted down a cost of living increase because apparently people feel that the minimum wage in New Hampshire, which is $7.25, is okay. And this is sticker shock for me. I mean, I say, gee, $50,000 a year, you might be able to make it on that. You can't. You just can't. And we all have to realize in New Hampshire we have an 18th century tax structure. It goes back to the property taxes, and your taxes are going to go up. So I'm just preparing you because your county tax is probably going to go up.
And in terms of property taxes, the county is paid for by the cities and towns' property tax. So Nashua represents about 25% of the value in Hillsborough County in terms of the overall values of the property. Now about $14 billion assessed. We pay 25% of the county tax, which I believe for us is around $13 million. So $13 million we send there. We also send $35 million to the state pension fund. So because of big mistakes they've made up there, we could get into that, but there's a lot of pressure on the property tax. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Mayor Donches. I'm just wondering, when we know that you need to make $35 an hour in the city of Nashua to even afford a one-bedroom, I'm wondering how we're helping the lower income families that are only making $30,000 a year. When we are having new projects built in and there is only one that is gonna have income-based housing in it, and that's under 200 units for the income-based part, how is that going to help the people in Nashua that already live here, that are trying to move up from said cockroach-infested apartments when they're trying to better themselves? And not only are they not able to do that, but the cockroach-infested ones have owners that are evicting them at an alarmingly fast rate. And I have found that, even that you said, we have several new housing projects that are coming in, and they are actually only addressing people with an 80% annual median income. So in a town where most of its residents are like at a 50% or below, who are we helping? Are we helping people from Nashua, or are we pushing people out that live in Nashua and welcoming richer people from other states to come and visit our gorgeous city that we've worked so hard to make this way?
Well, of course, you have articulated a significant problem. And we want everyone to be able to live comfortably, have a meaningful family and financial life. But the private market is very, very, very powerful. And the private economy, and you've seen the rents go crazy because of the housing shortage. So in terms of housing itself, we are encouraging the development of all levels of affordability. On the theory that yes, we want some of our units to be for 80% of AMI, area median income, or less. We want some market rate units so that in general, increasing the supply in general does help. In terms of so-called affordable projects, and the city has taken very aggressive steps on affordability. You did mention the Monahan Manor on Central Street. That is 210 units. That is a big increase in the supply. A couple of years ago, there is the project on Marshall Street in East Hollis. That is an entirely workforce-type housing project. We are working with NeighborWorks right now and it seems like this project is going ahead to develop 46 units that will be owned by NeighborWorks, a nonprofit. NeighborWorks at I think it's 249 Main, which is that parking lot, right, kind of that eyesore, kind of across from CVS. That's going to go below 80%. That will be 40 and 60, I think. I mean, we have to get those figures exactly, but it's going to be less than an 80%. And the Board of Aldermen passed an inclusionary zoning ordinance, which says that for new developments, there needs to be a certain proportion of so-called affordable units. And we're getting certainly some legal resistance on that, or resistance from some people, developers, not all. And we received $16 million of ARPA funds, far less than Manchester's 40. I have to mention that because it's a bit of a gripe. But 16 million, and 10 million was assigned to an affordable housing trust fund to stimulate the development of affordable housing. So there's still work going on to determine exactly how that will be applied to reach maximum effect. But we are trying to address the issues that you've raised. And Trish has something.
Thank you. One of the things I want to add and piggyback onto what the mayor had to say was that housing trust fund that he said that we're building up. I spoke to the director of community development, and yes, in some cases that 1 or 2 units, they're doing like in lieu of, and I'll be honest with you, there's one right in my ward, our ward right there, at the end of Bartlett Street, they're going to do in lieu of instead of. And that payment goes into this housing trust fund. And once the housing trust fund is built up enough, and per Director Sullivan, we're almost there, we'll be able to really entice developers to do exactly what we're hoping to do, to get some, 40, 50% housing in. So that's why we're building that fund up, and we're allowing some to do the in lieu of.
All right, well, I have a couple questions back on that, I'm sorry.
You need the microphone? Thank you.
Well, my first question would be, whereas we did have housing that came in that had more market rate housing, we did have one large problem with Marshall Street. However, when they built the market rate units, the voucher programs that our state of New Hampshire uses, they weren't high enough to actually be market rate, and it took a few months for the city to catch up and to actually go in there. And while that was happening, because the developer didn't want their development to be sitting empty, they allowed people from other states to come in and get those buildings because the vouchers from their states were actually market rate. So what are we going to do, one, to prevent that from happening when we actually have these market rate units for the people that are holding vouchers right now, so that they are actually market rate when the buildings are completed? And then my second question would be about the ARPA money and the trust fund, because from what I'm understanding is we would actually have to have a developer that would be interested, in developing a unit that wouldn't really bring in a lot of money. Because let's face it, if you're putting people that are on disability or have health issues or are just, they've done their life and, it's time for them to rest, and Social Security is not going to be enough to pay for a market rate apartment. So I'm just wondering how we're going to entice a developer to come and develop in our city when they're not going to actually make any money.
Well, you've asked a lot of questions. So the vouchers you're talking about are Section 8 vouchers, I think. Now, I had not heard this problem with Marshall Street. So I guess we'll try to look into that, but the city does not control how much these vouchers are. These are state and federally, determined. Although the Housing Authority does have some, but I don't know how those maximum prices are fixed for the Housing Authority. I assume HUD does that. The way that the Housing Trust Fund can help is that it can subsidize, help subsidize projects and can make them more feasible. For example, in the Marshall Street example, we did not have a housing trust fund then, but we do get federal home funds. And these are funds that are allocated by the federal government to be used by a community to try to encourage the development of more affordable housing. In the Marshall Street example, I think $200,000 of home funds went there. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but when someone is putting kind of a complicated financial deal together, a couple $100,000 could actually make a difference. We are putting home funds into this 46-unit project on Main Street that I mentioned. We put home funds actually into the Monahan Manor. We put home funds into the Spring Street Shelter in various amounts. We've given home funds to Habitat to build, units that are going to be owned. The most recent on Paxton Terrace.
And Granite, I think there's 2 going in on Granite.
We're talking with Habitat about, I think, 1 unit on Granite, but is it 1 or 2?
I thought it was 2.
Maybe it's
I
2.
think
Maybe
they're
it's
having one that's there and building the other one in the parking lot.
Yeah, so we're talking with them about putting home funds, we use these home funds to help try to increase the supply. But the need is great, and it's hard to meet it.
Mayor, you probably have time for one more question.
All right, so we do have to go down to City Hall, Trish and I at least, maybe Derek, I don't know, I forget. Okay, another question. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just had a question. What's the progress on the?
Right behind.
Oh, what's the progress on the asphalt plant? What's happening with that?
All right, so the asphalt plant, the applicant is seeking to build an asphalt plant. And the zoning there is complicated. It's traditionally an industrial zone, and so there's an underlying industrial zoning. And if that's all there was, the asphalt plant is a permitted use. But because the city is trying to encourage a transition of that neighborhood towards a more residential neighborhood, and because the hope is to locate a rail station near there, ultimately, passenger rail, there is another layer of zoning, which is called an overlay zone, and it requires that any new project meet various criteria. And we don't believe that the applicant can satisfy the criteria of the overlay zone. Traffic is part of it. One very significant requirement of the overlay zone is that there be a showing that values of surrounding properties not be negatively affected. And the riverfront landing, which is a little ways away, has produced an expert report showing that their value would be significantly impacted. And the methodology developed by that expert can be applied to other properties, and impact on closer properties would be greater. The city has engaged a similar expert, although we haven't gotten the report, to show that property values would be negatively affected. We also have gotten an environmental expert to demonstrate that there could be environmental issues caused by escaping gases and all that kind of thing. So all this evidence will be presented to the planning board, but the planning board is the final decider. It's not the Board of Aldermen, it's not the mayor. Under state law, this is a planning board issue. And we're not really allowed to speak to those planning board members except in the context of a public meeting about it. So at least directly, I don't think you should do that. We are, I'd say, optimistic, but we need help and support. Getting people to these planning board meetings is helpful, and to show that there is significant opposition, reservations about this whole thing. I do think it would be, we have a great potential in that whole east side for an entirely new kind of upgraded whole neighborhood, and this could very much retard that. So the next planning board meeting is March 23rd, and the plan is, I think, by the planning board to open the hearing at that time. But very unlikely there would be a decision then. You can see all this evidence. The other side has other experts, the applicant, so there's a lot of evidence, a lot of testimony, so it's unlikely to be done in one night. And I would encourage you to go to the meeting on the 23rd. The first step in any planning board procedure is for the applicant to present the plan. So, on the 23rd, that will be the first order of business. I don't know how exactly it will proceed from there, but they may take testimony of, opposition. But there's some very capable people who are seeking to persuade the planning board to deny. There's an environmental lawyer, Amy Manzelli, who represents Forest Properties. She's very effective. She's from Concord, and that kind of is the situation. That is the situation. All right, so we should go. Yes, Trish has one more thing, and maybe other aldermen, maybe quickly.
I have my cards here, and anybody who wants to get on my mailing list, please email me. And I can give you updates on what's happening with the rail and our U.S. delegation. And also, Senator Rosenwald asked me just to make a real quick statement on her behalf, because she could not be here. And she just wants everybody to know that she really is working very hard to lower the costs that we were talking about here that are coming down from the city. And she supports the city over the state. So she makes sure that the city is her number one priority, so.
And also, don't forget to give me your email so you can help me, help you guys to keep the city from getting destroyed by the State House.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming.